I'm Kavitha Davidson, and welcome to another episode of Sportly. If you've been enjoying the stories that we share on Sportly, you might be getting more interested in following along with current sports news too. But maybe you've noticed how difficult it is to find coverage that comes from a woman's perspective or isn't just interested in speaking to men. Well, that's why we're excited to be sharing an episode of The Gist of It with you. The Gist of It is a twice-weekly podcast about what's going on in the sports world, except they're bringing you current sports conversations from a female perspective. Hosts Ellen Hyslop and Stephanie Rotz discuss current sports topics and how they intersect with pop culture and social issues, covering everything from Major League season previews to calling out the sexist BS that we see in sports daily. Expect a hilarious yet informative conversation with a refreshing perspective on the world of sports. In this episode, Ellen and Steph chat about what's been happening in sports this week, the headlines you need to know, and going deeper on the stories that are making a big impact. Their episodes are such a great way to stay in the know, and they do it in a really fun way. So now, here's the gist of it.
Hello, pals. Welcome back to another episode of The Gist of It. Today is Thursday, November 7th. As per usual, we are your co-hosts. I'm Ellen Hyslop.
And I'm Steph Rotz.
And as I think probably every single listener is aware of, former President Donald Trump has defeated Vice President Kamala Harris in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Of course, there's a lot of feelings and a lot to sort through right now, and we're definitely sending love to our friends south of the border. And we thought for today's podcast we could focus for a second about how Trump's second presidency will affect sports and women's sports in particular. And we wanted to dive into it, I think, because we've been here before, and so we do kind of know what happened. There is a little bit of fact to this, and there was an impact on sports that we saw when Trump was president beforehand, and I think that we can expect, unfortunately, something similar.
Yeah, we're going to touch on everything from how the legislation on abortion rights impact women athletes to the dangers that trans athletes are going to face. There's a lot to discuss, and sports are inherently political, and these are all topics that we've discussed in numerous podcast episodes too, so it's not unique to this one particular episode.
And we still wanted to provide some light and something positive to look forward to, and that comes in the form of women's sports, of course. The NWSL Playoffs starts tomorrow, so Friday, if you are listening to this on Thursday, November 7th, and it's going to be an amazing playoffs. We're really looking forward to it. It was a record-breaking regular season, and I think that the playoffs are also going to bring in some amazing viewership and, more importantly, some awesome play on the field and on the pitch. So we're going to get to all of it. Again, we know that there's a lot of feelings right now. So if you also want to pause, take a beat, go to that second half of the podcast, you do you.
And yes, we said south of the border because Ellen and I are Canadian, so we could not vote.
Another thing that we did have to talk about that is also exciting is that the PWHL, our friends at the PWHL, y'all know we love them, they sent us a sneak peek of what the new jerseys are going to look like for those 6 teams. They are going to be dropping the new jerseys with the new team names at 8 a.m. on November 7th. And so it'll come out just after you're listening to this podcast or as you're listening to this podcast. But Steph and I got a sneak peek. We, of course, knew the team names and we saw the team colors and the team logos, but seeing them on a jersey just felt like something special.
Do you have a favorite? Because you'll be able to Google these. It'll be on our Instagram, I'm sure, by the time you're listening to this. So you can pull that up as we're talking.
I honestly love every single one of them. I think one of my favorite things about the way that the photographer did the shoot is that they went hard with the photography. There were some amazing star athletes that were featured in this photo shoot. I love the way that the photographer kind of allowed them to be fun and sassy and girly pop when they wanted, but also had them looking like the really tough, don't F with me hockey players that some of them really are. And I loved that dichotomy of girls can do it all. Like, you know what I mean? We're sassy and we also don't want you to fuck with us.
That's why I love the PWHL, because there is so much more personality with these hockey players than I feel other hockey players of different gender.
The men are starting to change. I think the men
Slowly.
are looking at PWHL and are like, oh my God, this will be great. Austin Matthews wants to be a part of the PWHL for sure.
Oh, he would have a lot more fun, I feel, for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And context, he's the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who was on the cover of GQ one year, and he got so much flack from his NHL friends because he was fashionable. Like, heaven forbid an NHLer was fashionable. And so that's why we're saying he would love the PWHL.
Yes, he would.
Which is your favorite, Steph?
Okay. This pains me to say, because we mentioned Austin Matthews because we're Toronto girls. The Boston one is the best. Objectively, I'm looking at all of them side by side right now, and I'm trying to think which one would I like to rock on a day-to-day basis outside of the arena. So from a civilian point of view, I think the Boston Fleet jersey looks the best to wear out and about.
Okay. I still liked the Minnesota Frost. I think that the color is divisive, and that's all I'm going to say on that. But I still liked the Minnesota Frost.
Can I go on a niche rant? I'll make it quick, I promise.
Please.
Something that has become popularized in all hockey leagues now, NHL, PWHL, all of them, are these new socks. They're like the entire thing is polyester. Like, I'm looking at the full kit here, and I'm zooming in, and I can't deal with these. Okay, so growing up,
what did they used to be?
So growing up, what it was this ribbed poly cotton blend, and so it kind of looked like a knit. It was a knit in theory, so it could latch onto the Velcro straps of your Jill. I don't know, do jogs have Velcro straps? I have no idea. I've never worn one. Which protects.
Can you explain what a Jill is?
So a Jill, essentially, you pull. It's like your first piece that you pull on that protects your what do you call it? Your parts.
Your parts.
So the jock is like the cup. And then they call the Jill is the woman version of that. And there's Velcro straps that you pull your socks up to, and you attach it to that. And these polyester ones, they're just like so much harder to get right, and they just fall down a little bit more. I don't know, why are we doing this? I feel like we need to bring it back.
Wait, so the polyester ones don't connect to anything?
You have to match Velcro to Velcro. Whereas before, because it was a knit, you could just slap it on there.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So you would just pull up the sock, because it had like a woven poly cotton blend knit. You would just put it right on the Velcro, so you never miss. Whereas these poly ones, you have to match the Velcro to the Velcro, and then the actual sock appearance itself looks different. It's thinner, so it's obviously meant to be more breathable. And I get that these players are playing in really hot arenas because spectators are also sitting them. So I get the function point of it, but they just don't look as good as the old school ones. Does this bug any other hockey player out there? Please let me know.
Please let Steph know. And Steph, what are you using right now then? You're still using the old school.
So I've been using the old school, like my ones from when I was like 16 for years now. But now I'm on this other team where we bought matching socks and jerseys, and they're the new ones, because that's all you can really get now for adults.
Poly.
We
don't love that. We don't love that. If anyone else is passionate about socks, period, please comment, like, subscribe. Whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, DM us at the Just Pod on Twitter, DM Steph directly on Instagram. She would love to hear from you.
Montreal has the best socks, though. The Victoire here in the P-Dub, they're nice.
Okay, so now it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of our podcast. As we chatted about at the beginning with former President Donald Trump becoming the president next year, I think that we can expect a lot of change to the women's sports. I don't want to say landscape, but essentially how women's sports are treated, portrayed, how they evolve, all of that sort of stuff, especially because we have seen some history with Donald Trump, but also with some of his fellow Republicans on how they kind of approach the world of women's sports altogether. And so we want to dive into a little bit still at a high level, kind of like 3 key areas that we saw previously with Donald Trump and how they affect the women's sports space, and then kind of zoom out at the end of some other kind of trends that we also saw at the time.
And so in each of these three topics, we'll be extrapolating based on past events, but also things that were said and done during the campaign itself. So something that would perhaps be foreshadowing what's to come. So that's where we're taking an angle at it. And so we're going to talk about trans athletes in women's sports. We're going to talk about Title IX in college sports in the U.S., as well as reproductive rights and how that will impact athletes, and particularly women athletes across the country.
So let's start off with really, I think the persecution of trans athletes is probably the way to phrase this. I think a lot of listeners who've been here for a while have heard us speak about this, but persecuting trans athletes was a popular talking point for Republicans this election cycle and is nothing new. We've been talking about this, honestly, since 2020 with respect to the persecution of trans athletes across sports. A 2022 poll reported that 61% of Americans say transgender athletes should only be allowed to play on teams that match their birth sex. Thinking this was a social issue that would mobilize Republican voters, politicians have been very outspoken on the topic, including Donald Trump. And so, again, I think it's that leveraging this issue to gain votes is something that we saw in this election cycle.
There was one attack ad against the Democrats that was really well funded, that focused on this exact topic. They spent at least $17 million on that particular ad and aired it 30,000 times across the U.S., especially during college football games where, the fans skew conservative, but also that is a very obvious link. That is an audience that is interested and invested in the preservation of college sports.
And I think, Steph, you talk about this a lot and you say it so eloquently, but trans rights are human rights. And with the attack on trans rights, everyone's rights with gender testing is going to be compromised.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where, of course, I don't want to say it because we should inherently care about our trans sisters and brothers, but whenever someone is attacking trans rights, they're really going to make life difficult and unpleasant for everybody. It's going to include more gender testing. We've already seen this with people accusing people of being trans who were born cis, who are cis, and taking that into account when they get beat or when they think something's been unfair. So it's going to be one of those things that gets leveraged against people when they think that they should have won.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of what we wanted to talk about on the persecution of trans athletes. Moving along to what, Steph, you mentioned on Title IX and Title IX protections. For context, Title IX is supposed to provide opportunities for equal access to sport and just equal access for men and women across university and college on the whole. It's really supposed to be an equalizer, and it was enacted in the 1970s, I think 1972, when it was really just so clear how men were being treated in academics in comparison to women, and then how that kind of funneled into sports has essentially mean that there is basically equality across men's and women's sports programs.
And while we're talking about this, we're not saying that it's going to be rescinded or taken back or anything but like that. But what often happens first with these types of picking away at rights is how these things get enforced or how they get protected just varies across the country, and how they get interpreted varies depending on who is looking at these different cases in terms of who's being accused of not upholding Title IX. So it's not necessarily saying it's going to go away, but how you pick at people's rights is you just interpret these things differently and you don't give equal access.
And with that, the expectation with the Trump administration is that Title IX is likely to lose its teeth to a certain extent. Again, it's not going to be overturned, but I think it's kind of that lack of enforcement around the Title IX protections. Republicans in the House spent months undoing Biden's proposed Title IX protections for women and LGBTQIA plus students as an example.
And Title IX covers equal access to sport in terms of facilities, varsity sports, etc., but it also can encompass how a student athlete would be treated during an alleged sexual harassment investigation and the requirements with that. And so that, of course, is at risk of being a re-traumatization process if this administration reverts back to the previous policies.
Some critics have said, and we'll quote them here, that the Trump administration, quote, narrowly defined sexual harassment and investigation requirements, and that, quote, could discourage victims from reporting sexual assault and harassment on college campuses, end quote. And that was kind of the Trump era policies of past, which is why many are saying, okay, Title IX might not go away, but what the heck is it actually going to look like this time around? Is it going to be better than before? Is it going to be worse? Will it be the same as 2016 to 2020?
And of course, we can't finish talking about this without talking about reproductive rights and how this is going to affect women and women who play sports, not only at the college level, but also the professional level, and how this will interfere with their choices in terms of where they'll go, but also how they'll be protected when they land in those schools and in those professional atmospheres.
And we also recognize that some states voted for abortion protection and a women's right to choose and all of that sort of stuff, but then also still ended up voting for Trump. But in their other races, they were really searching for bodily autonomy and freedom, and that's great. And it was like so good to be able to see that from those specific states. And so there is also, in all of this that Steph and I are talking about, we totally recognize that there is state legislature versus federal legislature as well. But on the whole, this reproductive rights conversation is a big one with respect to President Donald Trump in particular. And we saw that be a big factor in women's sports during his last presidency.
And just to give some context to what Ellen just said, especially for Canadians like myself who may have been more recently educated on this topic, there are what's called down ballot parts. So like the ballot itself is not just who do you want to be president, X, Y, or Z, or whatever. There's other issues on the ballot that you can literally vote for, which I always forget is a thing in U.S. elections because we don't have that here. We don't have issue votes on the ballot. So when Ellen said that there is some states or a lot of states that actually had a specific phrasing of a question regarding reproductive rights, abortion rights, or however it was phrased, and then you could vote for or against it on the actual ballot. This is probably a given to all of our American listeners, who is the majority of our listeners, but I just wanted to say that.
And like I think also too, because there was that issue at that federal level that everyone was talking about, but then at that state level, that issue was still super important. And women and other people and allies still came out and voted and said, we need to be able to have access to safe abortions. But maybe I'm still going to vote for Trump, which is interesting, but they were kind of picking and choosing what things mattered potentially most to them. And so that's just a caveat here. We talked about this in other podcasts, where players choose to go to school, coming out of high school, into college, into university, where they're going to play. Reproductive freedoms become a big conversation of what state they decide to play their sport in. When you look at the professional level too, Steph, and you think about free agency, when you think about trades, when you think about drafts, a lot of these athletes, and I'm talking men and women, because it's not like these guys don't have wives who also want to be having kids or do have kids. These players really have no choice of where they end up. Unless they're at the very, very top of their game, they get kind of moved around wherever they want. And so this really, really does impact, depending on the state that they're in, how those athletes get to live their lives.
That's a really good point, too, because I've seen a lot of TikToks about athletes who are looking to go to college, zooming in on certain states and being like, okay, I'm going to try and go to school here. But of course, not everyone has that choice. And from the professional level, WNBA athletes have mobilized around protecting reproductive rights, especially before this particular election. LeBron James appointed Nneka Ogwumike this year to lead his More Than a Vote nonprofit, which focused on women's rights and reproductive freedom this particular election. And the WNBA has really always really embedded their activism and their encouragement to go vote a part of the league for so long. And that, I think, what makes women's sports unique is that this is a constant conversation that we're having.
And they've done so much for having these conversations. And when we talk about abortion stuff, we're also talking about IVF and access that people have to IVF. And again, these are like family decisions. This is not just a women's decision and an impact on women. This is also impacting their entire family as they go through this, as they're thinking about abortion and what have you. And so it's like trying to figure out for those athletes what this means for them now when different areas of Senate are blocking bills that would ensure nationwide access to IVF, or certain states are blocking access to having a safe abortion. And also for these leagues and for these expansion conversations, what does that mean for where the NWSL or for the WNBA, where do they expand to next? Where does the NHL actually move a poor performing team? These types of things start to become a part of that conversation.
Yeah, especially for women athletes too. They are playing for a lot of their reproductive years. So a lot of these athletes talk very openly about freezing eggs, embryos, really actively planning their future family because they want to have that opportunity after they've chosen to stop playing. So that's also part of all of this conversation too, right? It's the potentially the college athletes who need access to abortion so that they can continue to play out their college years, but it's also the women who are planning actively for their future.
That's such a good point. So there's a few kind of things that I feel like we need to summarize after all of this. Really, I think we talked about today, Steph, what a Trump presidency could potentially mean for a lack of protection for trans athletes, what it means for athletes, period, with respect to reproductive rights and freedoms, what it could potentially mean for Title IX, what it could mean for equal pay. I also think a few other things that are worth kind of talking about and discussing. And what we saw between 2016 and 2020 was really how former President Donald Trump picked and chose his support for athletes based off of his preferences. We saw a lot of favoritism going on if they were Republican versus if they were Democrat, how outspoken they were. And that really rubbed a lot of people and a lot of athletes the wrong way. We saw a lot of teams refusing to visit the White House. We also saw a lot of teams not being invited to the White House, which I think we'll probably see again over these next 4 years.
One thing we can definitely expect is that will be an ongoing conversation, is whether or not teams will A, get invited, B, accept the invitation, or C, have their invitation rescinded, because that happened so many times before, whereas a player would say something online and then there would be a tweet that would come out from the president saying, invite rescinded. So there were a series of teams who did go, including New England Patriots in 2017, 2018 Washington Capitals, among others. So there were teams that did go to the White House, but there were notably so many teams that did not go after they declined an invite, like the 2017 Golden State Warriors, after criticism of players like Steph Curry openly spoke about, and several NBA and WNBA champions also declined in the following years. But I think what we want to underline here is so many women teams were not invited to the White House during this period. We had Ali Krieger on our podcast recently. That was the first time an NWSL champion team was invited to the White House. So I do think that we can constantly expect this to be a part of the conversation. And it does really highlight how athletes and teams leveraged their voices during that previous presidency and really talked about political issues. And I think one of the things that I'm always going to remember is the offhanded comment that Megan Rapinoe made in reference to winning the World Cup and how that was received online, and how we talked about women who voice their opinions online and how that shapes the conversation on sports as a whole, because they are inherently political.
I think that's exactly it, Steph. Like, sports are inherently political, and I don't think we ever saw that as loud as we saw during that initial Trump presidency from 2016 to 2020. So, deep breath, everyone. That is all that we are getting to today. We hope that you stick with us as we talk about brighter things ahead with the NWSL postseason. Okay, of course, a very important conversation for us to have, Steph. But now, let's transition to talking about soccer, my favorite sport in the whole wide world to play, even though it hates me playing it. The NWSL playoffs officially begin tomorrow, Friday, November 8th at 8 p.m. Eastern, with the number 1 seed Orlando Pride taking on the number 8 seed Chicago Red Stars, soon to be named the Chicago Stars at the beginning of next season. One thing I will say, Steph, when we first started covering the NWSL in 2017, The Orlando Pride were like pretty good, and then they like had a massive drop off. I think Ali Krieger was playing for them, Alex Morgan was playing for them, whatever, and then it was kind of silent. They were playing so well, and this year they have come back with such vengeance. I'm so excited to see them in the number 1 seed.
Yeah, they're the team to beat this year, eh?
I'd say so.
And for the first time in NWSL history, the postseason features 8 squads, which is up from 6 from the previous years because, again, expansions. Today, we're going to give you a glimpse at the 4 quarterfinal matchups as well as the players to watch throughout the postseason. So in addition to giving you the teams, we're going to talk about some of the players.
So exciting stuff that it's gone from 6 to 8, and I think that's just an example of how much the NWSL is growing, the expansion and the number of teams that we're seeing, which is really exciting. One thing I do want to confirm is that these are one and done games, very similar to other soccer tournaments, but also some other soccer tournaments have 2 legs where they play 1 home game and 1 away game, and then there's this goal differential thing. That's not what the NWSL does. It's kind of 1 game, you win and you move on, you lose and you're done. And so it's actually very similar to the NFL format. There's also no buys with the NWSL. So the number 1 seed is playing in that first round, same as the number 2 seed. So we see that in a lot of other leagues, but when you only have an 8-team postseason, they decided not to really be like the W and to just kind of move forward with every single team playing an individual game.
I don't know if you think this would be worth noting, but I do. I feel like it is worth noting, is that the championship game location is already set too. Which is very NFL like.
Okay,
yeah. So there's the NFL vibe there. Yeah.
Yeah, NFL vibe. And I think maybe MLS too. I think MLS is at home. It's very NFL. So they've kind of, I think what's cool is that they've kind of picked around what they need and like saw the most benefit of, and this year's NWSL Championships is going to be hosted in Kansas City at the Current Stadium, which is the first stadium in North America that was purpose-built for female soccer players, which is really cool. So let's get into match number 1. It's the number 1 seed Orlando Pride versus the number 8 seed Chicago Red Stars. As we mentioned already, Steph, like the Pride are the team to beat in 2024. They did not make the playoffs last season, and that's what I'm saying. I'm like, I cannot believe that we are here after that. The Pride only lost 2 games this entire season. They are unbeaten at home, and tomorrow's game is at home. So it's going to be interesting. I will say 2 of their losses came in their last 3 games, but I'm like, it doesn't really matter that much. They're probably resting some of their starters, whatever, you know?
2 players that we really want you to know. One, you probably already know her name. So Marta, like the Marta of Brazil, is on this team. But the top scorer is Barbara Banda. Banda has scored 13 goals in her first NWSL season, and she finished 2nd in the Golden Boot race, which is the race for the top goal scorer in the league.
She's so good. It's so fun being able to watch them together. It's kind of like the old guard and the new guard, you know, it's really, really cool to see. As for the Red Stars / soon to be Stars, they've had a very meh season. I think that it's pretty impressive that they even made the postseason, honestly. They've been more so in rebuild mode, especially after majority owner Laura Ricketts purchased the team last year. She's also a co-owner of the Chicago Cubs, and I really love to see that when someone in one city is investing in the men's team and the women's team. I think the 2 names to know on the Red Stars are Mallory Swanson, who of course is a member of Triple Espresso of the U.S. Women's National Team, but also goalie Alyssa Nair. And that's when you never know what's going to happen when you have 2 superstars from the national team playing for you. They know how to step up in big moments.
Yeah, and one of them is the keeper. So
exactly.
That's
one of them's the keeper. And she's so good. So that's match number 1.
And then match number 2, we're seeing Kansas City Current, so number 4 seed Kansas City Current against number 5 seed North Carolina Courage. Kansas City is currently Temwa Chawinga's team. This is her first NWSL season, and she scored a record-breaking 20 goals, so she is the one who won the Golden Boot. She's been downright unstoppable this season, but she's currently out with a knee injury. She missed the final regular season game, and there's no timeline for her return at this point. She's day-to-day, which is so upsetting going into her first playoffs in the NWSL.
Yes, and if they have an incredible season, and if she has this incredible season, then she can't play in the postseason, I can only imagine how heartbreaking it is. But as we know in soccer, especially with the ACL epidemic that we have for women, we do not F around with knees. If your knees are bad, we don't want to go there. And so we don't want her to be forcing that. Then on the flip side, they're playing the North Carolina Courage. And Steph, like, it's all about peaking at the right time in the playoffs. I was just watching the starting five on Netflix, all about NBA starting five. Finally got to it after I finished receiver. I had so many things in my queue, you know? And Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics was basically talking about how they like had won 5 in a row and then ended up losing to Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves. But he was like, it's a long season and you have to peak at the right time. And the Carolina Courage, long season, they did pretty well for the top 4 teams, but they are not peaking at the right time.
They lost the last 2 matches of the regular season, which is not the peak that you want, but they do have a solid defense, and y'all know how much I love defense. And the pressure is really on forward Ashley Sanchez, who was traded to the Courage from the Spirit earlier this year, and so there's a lot of pressure on her to produce, and she's led the team in goals and assists all season, so that is expected to continue on in the postseason.
Speaking of the Spirit, what a great transition, Steph. Let's move on to match number 3. So this is where we will see the number 2 seed Washington Spirit play off against number 7 seed Bay FC. I think it's so cool that Bay FC is in this with their debut NWSL season. They are just the second expansion team in league history to make the playoffs in their debut season, which is so, like, you really can't understate how cool that is, because they haven't really been able to build up year over year chemistry. They haven't really been able to build up their brand as a team that other players actually want to go to and visit based off of their staff and how they're, you know what I mean? Like, I just think that it's really, really special what they are building over there.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to stick with Bay FC? Because we did it kind of out of order. We were going top seed, higher seed.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That was the okay. So number 7 seed Bay FC. Steph, you can talk about the Washington Spirit, number 2 seed.
The Washington Spirit is really, really hungry for their first championship under Michelle Kang. Kang became the Spirit's majority owner in 2022 and just been really instrumental in transforming the club and also women's sports at large. So heart. The Washington Spirit is led by Trinity Rodman and is really flourishing at this point in time. And Rodman is back from a brief back injury, but the squad is without their standout rookie, Croy Bethune, who tore her meniscus tossing the first pitch at the Washington Nationals game over the summer.
Why is that so me-coded?
That's so Ellen. Yeah, y'all should link up.
Croy, what's up, girlfriend? Hit me up. What's going on? Honestly, though, meniscus is like, it's painful, but it's not too bad. She'll be back with a vengeance next year. No worries.
Did you tear that?
I partially tore it, and they didn't repair it. So I feel it all the time. It's basically bone on bone in your knee.
Cool.
Gross.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. To clarify, too, we said hungry for their first championship under Michelle Kang. They have won previously, but this is a new era. So there's that.
It's a new dawn. It's a new day. It's a new life. Anyway, so Steph, Gotham FC is trying to defend their 2023 title. And if a New York team / New Jersey team wins the NWSL championship, and then the Liberty, of course, already won the WNBA title, New Yorkers are going to go absolutely apeshit for their sports and women's sports. And with the Yankees, they obviously were so bad during the World Series, but the Yankees making it all the way that they did, like, it's a good time for New York. So last year's stuff, no one expected them to make it to the final. They were playing such amazing soccer, though, at the end. And what's really cool is that after winning the championship, and of course being in a city like New York and New Jersey, they were able to acquire a lot of people over the offseason to essentially become a soccer super team. And I put super team in quotes for soccer because there's 11 people on the field at once. It's really hard to like properly be a super team, but they acquired midfielders Rose Lavelle and Crystal Dunn and defender Tierney Davidson, and all of them are U.S. Women's National Team players. I think that they have 7 national team players on Gotham. Their goalie is the German goalie from the Olympics, who basically stood on her head that entire tournament. And so when you think about people who know how to play in big moments, it's everyone on Gotham FC.
Wasn't it Germany who knocked us out? Canada
knocked Canada out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
them. So that's her. That's her.
Speaking of Canada, though,
we have to talk about the Portland Thorns. They want to send out captain Christine Sinclair. They want to send her out with a championship, and I feel like that's what she deserves. sorry, my bias is coming through. Longtime Portland Thorns and Canada women's national team icon Sinclair, she's retiring at the end of this NWSL season. And I absolutely love, was it Nike, what they sent out to the people that she scored on, the keepers that she scored on? They sent them like a little something saying like, you can live happy because you won't be scored on by Christine Sinclair again.
I loved it. It was so cheeky. It was amazing marketing. And I think too, Steph, as much as you're like, yeah, okay, Canadians care so much about her, just people in the soccer world care about her so much. She is the greatest international goal scorer of all time, male or female. And I think when you think about the NWSL, she has been there from the very earliest of days. Like this league started in 2013, quick math, 12 years. Like she's been here since day one. And so thinking of the NWSL without her is really hard. And I think that's why Sophia Smith, another member of Triple Espresso with the U.S. Women's National Team, she's come on the podcast beforehand, and she's also been Sinky's teammate for a number of years now. At the end of Christine Sinclair's final regular season game with the Portland Thorns, she gave an interview and she was standing side by side to Sinclair, and she basically like broke down and started crying, just speaking about what it's going to be like not being able to play with Christine Sinclair. And that just had me in my feels so much, because I think that she's one of those veterans whose quiet leadership and leading by example really helps those new people feel at home, but also feel motivated and learn from them. And so that's just like really the impact that she's had. And I think why so many people are torn up about Gotham and Portland playing each other because of Sinclair, but also because everyone ends up like, everyone loves to hate New York, but everyone loves it when New York wins. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't possibly think about this for any longer, or I will cry, because I just love Sinky so much. She's such a delicate soul. She's, you would think after all those accolades she'd be inflated, and she's not. She's great.
She's so humble.
Don't doubt the Thorns. They are one of just two teams alongside Gotham to beat the Pride this season, who we said probably is going to win all of this. So if you're going to watch one matchup, perhaps watch that one, Gotham versus Thorns, because this is going to be a good one.
Yes. We're going to wrap things up with, as I always say with soccer is a game of moments. Literally anything can happen. You never know what's going to happen. But you do know what's going to happen at the end of this episode. We're going to thank y'all so much for tuning in. We will not have a new episode next Tuesday, as our teams will be off to commemorate Veterans Day and Remembrance Day in the U.S. and in Canada. But we will be back in your feeds with a regular episode of The Gist of It 1 week from today, next Thursday. In the meantime, if you enjoyed today's episode, you know the drill. Please rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend. I feel like we went through a few important topics today.
I feel like we went through some things today. This episode was edited by Savannah Held and produced by Alessandra Puccio, Ariana Prasad, and Lauren Tuscala. Again, I'm Steph Rotz.
And I'm Ellen Hyslop. We are sending you so much love, and we'll chat with you next week.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Gist of It. If you want more conversations like this, you can find The Gist of It in your favorite podcast app. They also have a daily newsletter if you want some sports news straight to your inbox. Tune in next week for an all-new episode of Sportly.